Yeah, my friends, this was me last night, spending some time with the new inverter JK-BMS here in the off-grid garage. Guys, and welcome back to another video here from the off-grid garage in super sunny and quite hot Australia. It is exactly 10 AM in the morning and we have already 81 amps outside. That's how it looks like. Pure sunshine. Look how high the sun already is. Just well above the trees in the morning already. So it's coming up there in this gap. And then I've got full power until here somewhere. This is then 3 o'clock or so. Solar production in summer has never been a problem. Never. Alright guys, let's do this. In today's video, which is part 2, you can say, of this little JK-BMS series now, we want to have a look at the connection, the apps, the PC software, and also the communication to your inverter or to the Victron system with this new industrial style inverter JK-BMS. This is the brand new, most anticipated BMS, and it is out now. I've got it here on my workbench. If you haven't seen part 1, I linked this down under the video. Maybe watch this one first and then come back and continue watching here. And you have probably seen that I'm wearing my red t-shirt, my alarm red t-shirt. And you may have also seen the community post I posted last night after calibrating all these beds here. No, actually I didn't drink any of the beers at all, nothing. This was to make the scene more dramatic. So, and because I didn't get a manual for the JK-BMS and all the accessories so far, we just go and have a look what we actually have. So this is the communication board here. This is the white ribbon cable. Plugs in here, plugs into the BMS. And then we've got 2 more connection cables. One is wider than the other, so can't be wrong. You can't put it in the wrong way. So it's very straightforward to connect this BMS actually. This clips in here. So, and the other one here. And this concludes already the connection of our communication board to the JK-BMS. And in the last video I told you about these 2 smaller connectors here on the PCB, on the BMS. Well, and to use these smaller plugs here, you've got 2 options now. You can either use this single power button, or if you bought the optional display, you can use this cable to plug into the BMS. So one is power button only, and the other one is power button and the display. And because we have the display here, we use the display option. So we plug this small connector to the BMS there, and the other connector goes on the back of your display, clicks in, and then you've got the power button. This one is actually just a button, so it resets after you let it go again. And then we've got this wire here included as well. First I thought this is like a communication cable style RS485 or something maybe, because it fits perfectly into the port on the other side here. But then I thought it could be actually the cable for the heating pad. It has lots of cable connected to the negative ring lug here, and then we've got a red and black cable, but they are fairly thin, so I'm not sure if this is for a heating pad or so. I don't know. And have a look at the balance cables. So they come in 4 bunches. We've got 2 wide connectors, 2 smaller connectors. And this reflects the ports here on the BMS as well. Wide, narrow, wide, narrow. Luckily, I left all the balance cables from the Pace BMS at our terminal block here, which connects to the Frankenstein battery. And the balance cable connectors from the Pace BMS are exactly the same as for the new JK-BMS. So I will just reuse these. It saves me a lot of time to connect all these cables here. So following the instructions on the website on how to connect the JK-BMS is connect the negative first. Battery main negative goes to the B negative here on the PCB. Then we connect the battery positive first. This is this one single red cable here dangling out of the BMS, and this connects to your main positive of your battery. And then it says connect the balance cables in sequence. So starting with the first bunch of balance cables. And Pace BMS has done a better job because they have labeled all the balance cables. So this is connector number 1, number 2 is this one, plugs in, number 3, plugs in, and number 4. There we go. And then you would connect your load and your chargers on the other side on the P negative here of the BMS. We are not going to do this right now. We just want to have a look at the app and PC software and how it connects. So one last check. Negative, positive is connected. All the balance cables have been plugged in. Communication board is up and running. Got our display plugged in with a power button. All right, then let's click the power button. You can see a red light flashing here. The display is coming on, giving us some information here. Overall pack voltage, overall pack current is 0 at the moment. A state of charge of 74%. Well, and then it turns off after a few seconds. You have to push the button again. We can see the voltage deviation across all our 16 cells, the internal BMS temperature, the ambient temperature. Now this is actually the battery temperature. We've got no alarms at the moment. We've got the average cell voltage here. The balancer is turned on, the charge MOSFET is turned off, and the discharge MOSFET is turned off as well. Tapping on this tab here gives you all the cell voltages. And then the BMS turns off because red one is the lowest, blue one is the highest. And the alarm tab doesn't give you any information at the moment because there's no alarm. So far this setup takes about 5 minutes and you're up and running. No big deal. Alright, for this BMS here, you need to install a newer version of the JK-BMS app on your mobile phone. This is either available for Android phones as well as for Apple phones with iOS. I link all these versions down under the video. So, and after installing and starting the JK-BMS app, we can see we've got our battery number 2, the battery in the middle shelf. And then we've got the new JK-BMS, the PV2A16S20P01. So let's have a look at the old JK-BMS. That's the one here. And have a look at the top here. The time, 1 year, 244 days and 19 hours. So this BMS is running for almost 2 years now without any problems at all. This is the first generation JK-BMSs they have sent me, and since we installed it in the battery shelf, it is running non-stop. Because remember, this is the first generation of the JK-BMS, and it needed a jump start voltage to actually fire up. There was no push button or something for it. You needed to have another 4 volts or something on top of the battery voltage to actually start it up. That's why I leave it running all the time. And it works. It just works. In contrast to... Okay, but this is about the new JK-BMS, so let's connect to this one. And you can see the red light is now solid here on the actual BMS. Before it was flashing. So, but once you are connected, the red light is solid. So this is a good indicator for you to check if the connection is established. If you have seen my community post, it gets really messy, but interesting. And here we have the usual 3-screen app design. So this is our dashboard. If you swipe to the left, you get into the settings, including the advanced settings. And if you swipe once more to the left, you come into your control panel where you can turn off and turn on certain functions of the BMS, like the charge discharge or the balancer or the heating function. So this is exactly the same dashboard, the same app, the same feeling as for the other JK. So this is a big plus. They haven't developed any new app for that, thankfully. They're just using what they already have and extending it. The dashboard here at the top has a bit more information now than the dashboard for the old JK-BMS, obviously, because this BMS has a lot more functionality than the old one. But the operation and feel is exactly the same. Okay, when you first start the application, it wants you to change the password. Otherwise, it is flashing with a yellow warning in the middle of the screen there. But it also flashes the red light here on the communication board just because they want you to change the password. So right under the time, it gives us a bit of information about the controls of the BMS. So charge and discharge, pre-charge is all turned off, and the balance function is turned on at the moment. You can see the overall pack voltage of the Frankenstein battery and 0 amps, obviously. Battery power in watts, the average cell voltage. Battery capacity is 40 ampere hours. I have to set this correctly. Cell different voltage, 70 milliamps. Remaining capacity, this is all calculated by the BMS. And we can also see that the balance current, the balancer is actually active at the moment because of the wrong settings, I guess. Remaining battery capacity is 74%. And then we've got a whole bunch of temperature sensors on the right and one is on the left for whatever reason. Cycle count is 0. We've got a current being displayed here for the heating function. The heater is off at the moment. Then we have a timer for the emergency status, I assume. Whenever you turn the BMS into emergency mode, it starts counting. We had 33 fault record counts. This was me not changing the password at the beginning. It was constantly nagging me until I changed it. There's a time to enter sleep setting, and the PCL module is turned off. Underneath, we've got all our cell voltages, with the blue one being the highest and the red one being the lowest. And you can see the balancer is already active. So it's taking energy from the blue flashing cell now, and now it's putting it into the red flashing cell. And we can see the balance current up here turning positive and negative accordingly. And underneath is the cell wire resistance. I never looked at this. I never did any calibration of that. I just went with the whatever it's being displayed here. Okay, swiping to the left gives us the basic settings: cell count 16, battery capacity we need to change, balance trigger voltage. This is your deviation. This is not when the balancer turns on. This is your deviation you can set. So if the cell difference is more than 10 millivolt, it starts the balancer. If you are over the balance start voltage as well. So there are two trigger points for the actual balancer. And then we have the calibration voltage and current. So if your BMS doesn't show the correct figures, you can use a calibrated multimeter or reference voltage and calibrate the BMS accordingly. So clicking on the advanced settings, probably just put in my password here, verify. And we probably, first of all, we should click on the lithium iron phosphate profile at the top. And you will see that some of the figures down here will already change accordingly then. You should click this button only once at the very beginning, because once you start modifying these parameters and click this button again, it resets it again to the default settings of lithium iron phosphate or whatever profile you choose at the top. Let's have a look if it's still balancing. Yeah, balancer is still active. So we change this one here, of course, to 3.45 volts, hit OK. You can always hear the confirmation beep as well of the BMS. And this should make our balancer stop. Yes, now it has stopped because we have not reached the 3.45 volts with one of the cells. Maximum balance current 2 amps. Cell over voltage protection 3.6, that is fine. And now this is a new parameter here in the app. It's called the state of charge 100% voltage. And it sits on 3.55 volts. So at this stage, I am not 100% sure if all the cells need to be over 3.55 volts or if one of the cells needs to be at 3.55 volts. So we will find out soon. But this is when the BMS resets to 100% state of charge. So there is actually a separate value for this feature here in the BMS in the app, which is highly welcome. This is something we always wanted. Because we as the user, we want to tell the BMS, hey, as per my design, as per my battery design, the battery is now full. Please show 100%. We don't want to wait until we hit 3.65 volts or any other alarm voltage like in the PACE or Seplos BMSs. This is actually pretty good now. It has a separate entry here in the BMS where you can set your state of charge voltage. And you can see further down below here, it has also a state of charge 0% voltage at 2.65 volts. This is also when the BMS will show you a 0% state of charge. So in between we have the cell over voltage protection recovery. It's 3.55 as per default. And we also have the cell under voltage protection recovery at 2.65 volts. The cell under voltage protection kicks in at 2.6. We have also a power off voltage of 2.5. We have a voltage smart sleep voltage. I think this is a similar setting as we have seen in the PACE BMS already. And this is more like for transport purposes. And there's no communication, there's no charge going into the battery, there's no charge coming out of the battery. It will actually turn off the BMS below 3.5 volts. This is more like a deep discharge protection setting, I guess. And you can see the next parameter is the time smart sleep setting of 24 hours. This is how long it takes until this smart sleep function kicks in. The continued charge current sits on 25 amps. We can set this one here to 200 amps for our BMS and battery. The charge overcurrent protection delay sits on 3 seconds, that's fine. And we have a charge overcurrent protection recovery of 60 seconds. So that means if we would charge the battery with more than 200 amps for 3 seconds, it would disconnect your charger. And then it waits 60 seconds and then tries again. If it still measures 200 amps for 3 seconds, it keeps repeating this until the charge current is lowered below 200 amps. And we have exactly the same functionality for the discharge current as well. Discharge current is 200 amps. The delay is here 300 seconds. And then it waits for 60 minutes and checks again if the discharge current is still above 200 amps. So, and then we have a whole bunch of temperature protection and recovery settings you can put in. And the only major concern here is the charge under temperature protection of -20 degrees. We should not charge the battery in negative temperatures anymore. So this setting here is completely wrong. I will report this back to JK. This should be here at potentially 1 or 2 degrees. We're now getting an error because the recovery voltage just below needs to be higher. We set this one to 3 degrees. Set this one first, and then we can set our under temperature protection to 1 degrees. We then have a setting here for the short current protection delay. Sits on 35 microseconds. You want to react fast, and here again it waits for 60 seconds and checks again if the short current is still there. And then we have a discharge pre-charge current. I think this is when you connect larger inverters to the BMS, which have capacitors in charge up. But I'm not sure how this 5-second rule comes into place with a short current protection of the BMS, because connecting capacitive loads is like a short current for the BMS. So I have to ask how this functionality actually works here. Well, and then we have 4 new settings here, which we have not seen before. This is purely for the communication side of the BMS. We've got a device address, which sits on 0 at the moment. And this is exactly what we have here with our dip switches. So when I change the dip switches to something else, we have a different device address showing here in the app as well. Then we've got 2 UART protocols, UART1, UART2. And this is a bit confusing at the beginning. But here, having a look at the communication board, again, this is your inverter communication ports, RS485 and CAN, just for the inverter. Then we've got RS232, and then we've got 2 RS485 ports here on the right, which is for paralleling the BMS with other batteries. The UART1 setting is solely for this one port here, and you can set the protocol for your specific inverter talking RS485. The UART2 protocol is solely for these 2 ports here. This is for the internal communication. And you can probably see here in the app that we cannot change the UART protocol at all. If we click on this, it is fixed set to the JK-BMS RS485 Modbus protocol. Well, interesting here is, why would they make this functionality available in the app if we cannot change it? This is only for internal communication from one BMS to another BMS. And obviously, this is designed for this JK-BMS to talk to other JK-BMS. Well, if we can set this to the Pace BMS, for example, yeah, number 4, does this mean the JK-BMS might be able to talk to the Pace BMS at some stage, just by activating another protocol for the internal communication? So this could be a very, very interesting feature of this JK-BMS. So clicking on the UART1 selection, at the moment we have only a handful of inverters supported by the JK-BMS. There will be more coming out soon. As I told you in the last video, they are working on the Victron integration now, and this will be in the next update. And then, of course, we've got our CAN protocol, which that's the protocol of our CAN port here on the communication board. We've got the D inverter support now, the pylon tag, which I'm using at the moment, Crowbot, and you can see number 4 will be the Victron CAN bus protocol. And scrolling down, there are heaps of more protocols coming with future firmware updates, hopefully. And underneath you can calibrate your balance cables. If you have extremely long cable or extremely different cables, I would say, you can calibrate the resistance of your balance cables to have a better balancing result. And we swipe to the left again here and go quickly to the control panel of the BMS, of the app. So you can modify your password up here. You can turn off and turn on the charge functionality. We've got our balancing functionality turned on. You can enable the emergency mode here. This is when the BMS has shut down for whatever reason. You can override it with an emergency switch and turn it back on again. We've got the heating function here, which we can enable and disable. We can disable the temperature sensors. I guess this is more for an emergency situation as well. We can turn on the display. We can say the display is turned on. If I turn this one on, yep, display comes on and stays on all the time. And then you can turn it off again, so it actually stays on only for a couple of seconds, which probably I would prefer, otherwise it gets too bright. We can turn on the smart sleep function here, and we can disable the PCL module, whatever that is. The time calibration, if you hit this button here, it calibrates the BMS with the time of your mobile device. Up here in the top right hand corner, we've got the system log, so you can see everything we have done so far on the BMS. You can also export this one and send this to JK for troubleshooting purposes. You can download the faults of the BMS if there are any error codes coming up here. History of version gives you an overview over the functionalities of the app, not the software on the BMS. This is the app. Then we've got the language settings, and also we have got the about, which gives you all the information, what kind of BMS you have, the serial number, the hardware version of your BMS, the software version of your BMS. I'm running 14.03 as the firmware, the power on times, and also the app version here at the bottom, which is 4.16.2, which is linked under the video, as well as the new firmware versions. Yeah guys, and this is pretty much all the settings and dashboards and functionalities of the new JK-BMS here. Nothing has changed too much, which is great for people who already know the old JK-BMS, so you will be very familiar with the new app. There are a couple of new functions and settings you can set, especially the protocols for your communication boards. But overall, it is the same great functionality we know from the old JK-BMS. So yesterday when I saw the settings and the app for the very first time, I was very pleased, very happy with the result. There were no issues, I could understand all the settings, and there were no big surprises. It took me a while to figure out how this UART1, UART2 works, but the engineers from JK explained this to me, and it makes sense how it is. So, and then I tried to connect the BMS to the computer software. And this is where all the trouble started. First I tried with the RS232 port. Nothing. No communication. Whatever I tried, nothing. Unplugged the cable, plugged this into one of our other batteries over there, and it worked just fine. But here, JK-BMS, nothing. No habla. So then they told me, okay, you have to use the RS485 for that. So I did. RS485 to USB adapter, network cable plugged in, plugged it into the RS485 port, started the software, selected address 0 and COM5, connect, nothing. Also tested the RS485 connection with the other batteries here, just working fine. Adapter, cable, all working fine. Replaced also the network cable with another one, just to be sure, but no difference. Didn't want to communicate. After over an hour, they said, well, connect the RS485 port to the inverter RS485 port. So this is what I did then. I unplugged it from the internal communication port and plugged it into the inverter port. Set your address to 0, clicked on connect, and nothing. Again, nothing. And then they explained you have to set the UART1 protocol in the app to JK Modbus. Yeah? And this is the internal communication between your BMS and the computer software. And as you can see, it sits on JK-BMS, Modbus RS485. But still no communication whatsoever. So then they sent me a new version of the BMS monitor software for the computer, which I installed. What you have just seen is already the newest version. Still, nothing. Okay, then I went ahead, did some testing myself. turned on dip switch number 1, like this. And you could see, as soon as I did this, the communication established. So now the communication is running between the BMS and the computer software. So if we do a refresh here on the app, left and right, we can see the device address has now changed to number 1. Number 1 works, but we are still, weirdly enough, we are still connected to the inverter RS485, right? Not to one of the internal communication ports. So, okay, this is maybe how the BMS is designed. So here again we have our 3 tabs we know already from the app. Real time, which is our dashboard. We've got a setting and a control tab. And this is exactly the same functionality as you have in the app. Even the same symbols. Settings, let's do a full screen here. Verify password, okay. See, they're all becoming active now. I can change settings here. Click on send, and you don't get a beep from the BMS, but it has changed it, but no confirmation. Dashboard gives you exactly the same information as the dashboard on your mobile phone. What they have added are these gauges here on the left. One is for the current, negative, positive, charging, discharging, and the other one is for the voltage. And you also have this graphic down here with a warning list underneath if there are any warnings occurring. But apart from that, it's exactly the same as the BMS, so very consistent here, which I like. And you've got full control over the BMS, either from the app on your mobile phone or from the computer app. It doesn't matter which one you use, it's the same functionality, the same look, the same feel. So this is what I like, consistency. So to continue this story now, the first thing they did was sending me a new firmware update. I was still on 14.02 when I got the BMS from them. So the firmware update only works from the computer software though, not from the mobile app. To do that, super easy, click on these 3 dots here in the top right hand corner, go to upload firmware, select the firmware file you have. See, I've got already 2 of them. They are all linked down below. You select it, click on open. Yeah, I think we are getting this error now, binary file is invalid, because I have already applied this firmware version. Well, before there was another text showing, I can't remember actually, and then just click start updating. So don't click force updating, click start updating. And then you get the progress bar on your screen, which shows you once the firmware update is finished. Logging here is something we have seen before in other BMSs as well. It is just not as detailed as in the Pace or Seplos BMS, for example. So, and here is where the big frustration kicked in last night, because they told me you can now switch the connection of the RS485 communication from the inverter port to one of the parallel ports here, because this is the port we usually work with all the other BMSs as well to communicate with your computer and the BMS. So I plugged in the network cable to the RS485A port on the left. I started the software again, connected, and nothing. There's no communication once again. So long story short, again, back and forward with JK. They told me, go into the app, you have to configure the UART2 protocol now. So I went back into the app, clicked on the UART protocol, but as you can see, there's nothing I can do. Everything is grayed out, right? I cannot select any protocol here in the UART2. Sent them all the screenshots, videos, explained everything. And you can see the UART2 protocol sits on number 11. But here in this list, there is no number 11. It only goes to 10. When I scroll down, only 10. There's no 11. We tested everything several times, back and forward, sent screenshots. After the firmware update, computer software totally disconnected. So you would ask, why is it connecting now? Well, the only thing I did, apart from getting rid of all my beer cans, I disconnected the JK-BMS altogether. Yeah, positive, negative, everything, balance cables, everything disconnected, and put it back on my workbench to show you how to connect the communication board with all the cables to the BMS. And then we took it back over here and connected it to the Frankenstein battery. So it did a complete restart, reset, everything. And now it's different to last night. The frustration is still there. I'll tell you this in a minute. But the communication seems to be working now if we connect the RS485 cable to the inverter port. So, interestingly, the same error happens again. If I change the UART protocol for our inverter to the Groundhog, for example, yeah, and write this back to the BMS, all good. So now I want to reconnect to the computer software. So I have to select the JK-BMS Modbus protocol. So select this one here, click on OK, and it says sending failure. Exactly the same happened last night and we couldn't figure out what it was. So obviously the only method now to rectify that is by disconnecting the BMS and resetting it. Completely power it down. So before I'm getting a copyright strike because of playing I've Got You Babe all the time, well, this was pretty much what I did the last 2 days. Testing, troubleshooting, reporting back, waiting for a reply, more testing, repeat, 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 and we couldn't figure it out. I even replaced the communication board with the one from the Pace BMS because this is exactly the same, but still no communication on the RS485 ports. So very, very long story short, JK is now sending out a new BMS. They think it might be faulty for whatever reason. And at the moment, the communication is only working through the RS485 port of the inverter. So if you get your BMS and it's not communicating through these 2 ports here on the right, set all the dip switches to 0, go into the app and set the UART1 to the JK protocol, turn on dip switch 1. So this is the sequence you need to do to connect to the computer software. However, setting all the dip switches to 0 should also activate the broadcast on all RS485 ports. So even on the A and B port, we should see a communication possible now, but not with this BMS. So it may take another 1 or 2 weeks until I see the new BMS here, and then we can continue testing. I also asked him to send at least 2 BMSs because we want to see the communication between the BMSs as well. There are several BMSs now on the way. We just need to wait. Okay, back to the original video because, well, there's more. So this was last night at around 10:30 p.m. or something, and I said, well, leave it as it is. Let's move on and have a look at the communication to the Victron system. And here we have the Victron A cable. This is the type A cable. So we plug this into our servo, have it terminated on one side. This is the BMS side going into the servo. This is the battery side. It says battery BMS. And we connect this one to our CAN communication port, right? So we then go into our CAN protocol in the app and select the pylon tag. So click on OK. Could hear the beep. Let's log into the remote console of the Servo GX and have a look if the BMS actually shows up. Pool fans, smart BMS, there it is. So we've got all the details here. Highest, lowest cell voltage, temperatures, how many modules we have. We have seen this all before with the other batteries as well. It says it's a 100 ampere hour battery. Even I thought we have set, oh no, we haven't. Okay, let's change this one here to 280 ampere hours. Okay. Does it change in here as well? No, it is still showing 100 ampere hours here. That is interesting. Well, while we are in the app, let's check for these results here. Lowest cell, pack number 1, cell number 16. No, our lowest cell is here, cell number 13. Highest cell, cell number 15. No, our highest cell is cell number 6. Temperatures 29 and 30 degrees. No, the temperatures coming from the BMS are 26 only in the app. So none of this data actually makes sense here and seems to be correct. We are using the pylon tag protocol of the BMS, so it may not be 100% correct. So the only correct figure seems to be the overall voltage here, 53.3534. Yeah, that seems to be correct. Oh, now all of a sudden we have a 73% state of charge showing. Has this updated now? Oh yeah, remaining battery capacity 73%. It was just on 0 before. Okay, let's go down to parameters and have a look. So what we can see here is the charge voltage limit, the charge current limit, and the discharge current limit. These are the main three parameters the BMS uses to control the charge into its battery. So here in this case, it tells the inverter or your charger, your MPPT, whatever, to charge to 57.6 volts, charge with a current of 0 amps, and discharge the battery with a current of 0 amps. Well, this is apparently what is being submitted from the BMS to the Victron system. Where is this 57.6 volt coming from? We don't have any pack voltages here we can set in the JK-BMS. These are all values and settings we set on a cell level, which makes totally sense, because you cannot exceed a pack voltage in your battery without exceeding a cell voltage as well. So why would you bother about setting a pack voltage? But here, now, 57.6 volts. That sounds very familiar, right? This is exactly 3.6 volts. And the only value we have set to 3.6 volts is our cell over voltage protection. So if I change the cell over voltage protection to 3.65 volts and click OK, let's watch the Victron system, what it actually does. It changes to 58.4 volts, which is exactly again 3.65 volts. So obviously we are setting our charge voltage limit with a cell over voltage protection parameter in the app once again. Here guys, definitely another Groundhog Day. And I cannot find any parameters I can change here in the JK-BMS settings, which allows us to charge this battery or discharge it. The CCL and DCL are always 0, so your battery would never charge or discharge through your inverter, because both values are sitting on 0 amps. And this and finding out about the communication to the Victron system now was exactly the moment where I started calibrating a SPAT. This was the end of last night, close to midnight, with no result whatsoever. Couldn't connect to the computer software anymore. The errors coming up, the behavior of the BMS is totally random, it sees. It's not consistent. I cannot verify what I have done the day before. And I thought, well, let JK sort this one out. The communication of the PC software is not as important to me because I've got full access with the app on my mobile phone. Can change all the parameters, can do everything. But then connecting it to the Victron system and finding that the CVL, our charge voltage, is again dependent on a protection parameter. I mean, how long have we worked now on Seplos and the Pace guys as well to change this in their software, in their product design, to separate the charge parameters from the protection parameters? Last night it felt exactly like the Groundhog Day, inventing the wheel again, starting from scratch. And I don't understand this, because JK has asked a lot of questions and they always wanted to know what else can we improve in our BMS when it comes out. What other features do you want? What should we do better? And now this, it feels like below alpha version. We are once again testing the software for them. I offered JK all my help, all my time, everything they wanted from me, all the information, all the data, and said, look, if you start building such an inverter BMS with communication skills, get it right. Get all the information, get all the parameters, get all the feedback from the community, and make the best BMS ever. The expectation for this BMS was really high, especially after me providing so much feedback. Just 2 examples. I talked about the float mode, said if we set a full charge voltage, like in the Pace BMS, I even provided them screenshots from the Pace BMS. Say, look, these are the protection parameters. These are the charge parameters. They are separate. They need to be separate. It is the protection parameter is the charge parameter again. Charging a battery through the BMS needs 3 parameters. Once the absorption voltage is reached, hold it for a certain amount of time and then fall back to a lower voltage, like a float mode. 3 parameters in the BMS. which controls that, which gives these parameters to your inverter. Second request was the relays. These relays here, make them so people can customize the functionality. I don't care about an under temperature alarm or a heating function. I'm in sunny hot Australia. I've got other things to worry about. Yeah, and well, you have seen the parameters, the settings in the JK-BMS. What of all my suggestions have actually made it into this production, into this first production build here? Exactly, basically none. I mean, they also advertised they are supporting 48 plus inverters. How many inverters have you seen? The D, the Pylon, the Growbot, and that's pretty much it. 4 inverters in their list now. Well guys, this was again a big chance for a manufacturer of a BMS to get it right, to make the best BMS out there. I mean, I just looked at the Seplos Polo batteries here. Even Seplos has got it right now with their version 3 of their BMS. Charge parameters, CVL, CCL and DCL are completely separate from the protection parameters. And this BMS actually works. Okay, it has a shitty balancer, but the BMS actually works. Well, here we seem to have the total opposite. We've got a good 2 amp active balancer, which actually works, we have seen that. The rest of the BMS software. Well, you can probably see where my frustration is coming from now. I provided all the information, all the data for the last few months. Why would you start selling such a product on the market already if the software is inconsistent, supports only 3 or 4 inverters at the moment? The communication to your computer obviously has an issue somewhere. It took us over a year to fix all the issues in the Seplos BMSs. I've made over 25 videos about the Seplos BMS issues. Everything is recorded in all details in these videos. And they need to understand that the protection parameter is not a charge parameter. Okay, my friends, I think so far this wonderful and beautiful video from today. I will go back in the pool now, have an ice cold spat. Thank you very much for your generous donations, so I can keep my sanity. And yeah, I'll keep working with the JK team in terms of this BMS here. But at the moment, it is a beta product within alpha software. Should you wait for the JK-BMS to build your battery? Probably not. Buy something which works. Get an additional active balancer and all your problems are solved. As hard as it sounds, but this product should not be on the market right now. Can they fix it with a firmware update? For sure they can. Will they do it at some stage? Sounds a bit like 2 years ago when Volkswagen brought their ID electric vehicles on the market, right? The car was there, but the software was so shitty. Car didn't even drive. And we are pretty much seeing the same here again with the JK-BMS. As always, guys, thanks for watching. Thanks for all your amazing support here on the channel. Until the next video, when we probably do something different, or maybe they come up with a solution for that, you stay charged, stay safe, stay cool, and thanks again for watching. See you then. Bye-bye.